We got lucky this week. Every Friday, Nora bakes something. And this past week, yes, woo! And this past week, she made a pound cake. And not just any old recipe, right? This is Mama's sour cream pound cake. It's a family favorite. Mama has traveled many miles riding in a minivan with one on her lap or in a plane with one stashed in the overhead bin. No beach trip, weekend visit, or girls' trip is complete without a pound cake. And it is hard to describe to you all just how good it is. It's dense, but it is fluffy, right? Reese knows. It develops a delicately toasted crust, and it is sweet, but not overly so. And overall, it is just so buttery. Y'all, it is buttery. Now, what is remarkable to me, as a non-baking lover of baked goods, is that when I look at the recipe card for this, it's not fancy at all. It's got such simple ingredients: butter, flour, sugar, eggs, sour cream, baking soda, and almond extract. Nothing I can't pronounce, and also nothing that is like expensive. But when it all comes together, it is sublime. Now, I was thinking about recipes when I read today's text. Let me tell you why. Here we are. We're in the 4th week of Eastertide, and the lectionary gives us another resurrection story. New life is brought about in a place of damage and death and despair. But this time, instead of Jesus, Son of God, dying at the hands of the Roman Empire, well-known baddie, raised by the resurrecting power of God, the big G, we have Dorcas, a seamstress, dying of natural causes, not targeted state violence, and raised by the Spirit of God working through Peter, of all people, right? Right? Peter. These two resurrection stories, they just seem totally different. But present in both of them and in other resurrection stories of our tradition, we do find some commonalities, some shared ingredients, if you will. 1, the deaths of Jesus and Dorcas and others, they rip at the very fabric of beloved community. 2, both deaths could have abruptly extinguished powerful and essential healing work in a ruptured world. And 3, both resurrections reveal in a new way the revolutionary and transformative work of our living and loving God. Now, woven together, these threads create a context that is ready for resurrection, for something remarkable to unfold in God's unending story of love. So I figure that today it might do us some good to think about each of these essential ingredients that produce creative restoration. That way, we can join in this process. We can participate in how God is writing new life into our world, especially right now. First, resurrection depends on community. It's a foundational ingredient. Dorcas's resurrection story has community all through it. See, Dorcas was a connector of fabrics, yes, but also of people, of common concern, of shared need, of faith. Dorcas brought people together, all the widows of Joppa, bringing them out of isolation and binding them one to another. Dorcas's work wasn't just in textiles. That was her paid gig. But her side hustle of ministry, that was her real work. And she was obviously a brilliant community organizer. That culture, that time, it didn't see the widow, didn't care about the widow. It deemed them unvaluable, a drain on community resources, and without purpose to add anything to society. But Dorcas knew otherwise. She believed otherwise. So she stitched people together through relationship, across rupture, creating a new and unsettling force, a collective that was big enough to be seen by a society that would prefer them invisible. And Dorcas drew out of that body a unified voice that could actually be heard, that demanded to be listened to, in fact. Luke tells us the disciples heard that voice, that cry. It's because of that urgency, the power of their collective outpouring, that made its way to Peter. And it was forceful enough to move him to action, to come and see. But the voice of the women, of the widows, also called into movement the Spirit of God, which also showed up at Dorcas's deathbed. Now imagine what it might have been if Dorcas had accepted her lot in life of this normative community structure. A lone widow who made garments, died. Immediate family was present at her death. No community outcry. No message sent to the apostle. No miracle for all of the world. But that is not the way it went. And it was because of community. Luke notes that all the townswomen who had been widowed were there by Dorcas's side. She did that. Her good works, her open heart, her relentless spirit, her deep care for others. All of those good works, those God works, they even outlasted the life of her body. Turns out, God agreed with the women of that community who could not fathom that this would be the end to all of that goodness, to all of that grace. Her work in that holy and happening community, well, it was too important to let die. So God, through Peter, said, nah, get up, get up, keep it going. Now, as I consider this ingredient of resurrection power, my mind turns to the Poor People's Campaign. The work and the witness that Dr. King started in 1968 was way too important to let die. Millions of people across the country that make up the movement right now, they simply refuse to let themselves be silenced. They refuse to stay separated into these one-lane issues. Their cries for the common good bring them together, and they resuscitate Dr. King's essential work all of these years later. Bishop William Barber speaks of the resurrection work like this. He says, when someone has been a prophetic voice, has challenged injustices, you don't so much celebrate them as you recommit yourselves to the things that they stood for. You pick up the baton of the unfinished work, and you carry it the next mile. He goes on, we're attempting to raise up a generation of public theologians, and not just in the tradition of Dr. King, but the tradition of Reinhold Niebuhr, of Fannie Lou Hamer, of Dorothy Day, of William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, and Harriet Beecher Stowe. These were people who decided to be engaged from a theological perspective. And that theology was not just private religion, but looked deeply at the fact that the biblical text calls us to be concerned about the least of these, to put justice and love and mercy at the center of our public life and our public discourse and our public engagement. Now, demands for moral leadership and policies that promote love, justice, and mercy are as important now as they ever have been, right? The PPC continues to shake up the status quo. God, it seems like, won't let that work die. The living and moving Spirit of God still works through Reverend Liz, through Bishop Barber, through Pastor Arelis, Karen Collins, and many, many others, millions who keep calling for justice. They're answering to get up, get up. It's too important not to. Now, I look back at the recipe card, and I recall that the second ingredient in resurrection power is the continuation of healing. Think about Dorcas. What were her good works that she was known for, other than creating community? What did she never tire of, as the text tells us? If people know of Dorcas, they often know her occupation, right? A seamstress. But what they don't often recall is what her preoccupation was. And that was what Jesus said it should be, the least of these. Dorcas was a healer. She restored dignity to folks. She covered people. She clothed the naked. So often, we think about the work of disciples of Jesus, and we imagine them all to be evangelists, right? Or traveling preachers, or even supervising administrators. But Dorcas's ministry was care. It was compassion. And her work was with her hands and her heart. It was an embodied and an embedded ministry of relationship. And it's important to note that Dorcas, she gets this kind of extra distinction in the biblical text. I just have to say this. We don't often get a woman text to preach off of, so indulge me. Luke writes this. Luke says, there was a disciple. And for the first and only time in all of Scripture, the feminine form of the Greek word, disciple, is used. Now, we know that there were tons of women disciples. Easter would not have happened without them. But it's Dorcas alone that gets this feminized title of disciple. Clearly, her ministry of healing, of wholeness, was valued deeply by the followers of Jesus and also by the community of disciples. So, what do we make of this ingredient in resurrection? How can we, like Dorcas, participate in the ongoing work of healing and wholeness in our moment and in our time? Whitney Kimball Coe, who's the director at the National Center for Rural Strategies, she works a lot with people like Dorcas. People in small towns doing small things for good that have huge impact. And she sees healing that they are providing in their communities across the country. So she explains how we can follow their lead. She says, we can develop a learned response to the forces of globalization and automation, isolation and division. We don't have to accept the forces that are tearing our communities down. We can respond by leaning into connection when there is disconnection, by leaning into creation when there's destruction happening. She says it has to become a practice. Dorcas, she offers us that model. There is so much pressure to join the angry and to stay there. And there is so much despair and pressure to feel it and stay there. There is so much pressure to identify an enemy and keep them frozen there. But friends, resurrection doesn't leave the status quo alone. It builds out of bleakness and it creates a cross chasm. It rises from the rupture. And we're to be a part of this creative restoration with our hands and certainly with our hearts. Third and lastly, another ingredient of the recipe for new life is activated when circumstances combine in some miraculous way to reveal something new about our living God. Something in each of these resurrection moments, it transcends that specific time and place, and it becomes a part of God's story of unending love and transforming grace. Now, for this ingredient, we gotta look at Peter. Peter is on a roll when we find him in this text, and when he comes to Joppa. He had only days before, he was at Dorcas's deathbed, visited the saints at Lydda. And there, with the Spirit of God, and in the name of Jesus, he miraculously restored movement to Aeneas, who had been bedridden for 8 years. Peter is here, he is there, he is everywhere, teaching and preaching and healing. And he has become the principal witness to God's expanding grace and movement. Y'all think about that for a second. He is taking the good news way beyond Jerusalem and well beyond this tight-knit Jewish community. His actions show us that the good news is for all of y'all. It's for all y'all, period. And I think that Peter is the perfect disciple to boundary bust and to defy expectations in the power of Jesus Christ in the world. Because if we are honest, Peter defies our expectations, right? Because this is Peter, and we love Peter, but we also know him best for sleeping when Jesus needs him awake and for denying Jesus 1 time, no. 2 times? No. 3 times, Peter. 3 times. Not good, Peter. Not good. But look, was God done with Peter? Come on. Was God done with Peter? No. No. God basically said, get up. Get back up. And what we learn through the life and ministry of Peter, as he has an increasing power and faith, we learn again that God is not nearly done with us yet either. No one is excluded from God's grace, love, and mercy. No one. And what might feel like a dead end with God, it just really isn't. Now that truth, that's the rising agent in resurrection. We feel so much despair right now, and there is mind-boggling damage being done. Destruction, chaos, division, they all have center stage. But we are Easter people, friends. We are Easter people. And resurrection is central to our faith. And we can participate in God's creative restoration project by making a practice of community, by responding to the hurt of this world with healing, and by living lives that reveal God's transforming work of expansive love. When things seem bleak and despair is all too close, listen for the resurrection refrain. Make it your mantra. Make it your prayer. Make it your commission. Get up. Get